Sausages would very much like King Charles to invite the whole family to Sandringham this summer.
The Duke of Sussex has been desperately trying to engineer a face to face meeting with his father, the king.
Absolutely no reason to work with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle.
The Sandringham invitation is gone. Not postponed, not quietly shelved, gone. And the people inside the palace who are talking about it are not using diplomatic language. They are using the word enough. King Charles has spent the better part of 3 years absorbing hit after hit from his youngest son. The interviews, the memoir, the Netflix documentary, the Oprah follow-up. Each time, the palace response was measured, patient, careful. Each time, sources inside briefed the same line. The king does not want to escalate. The king believes in reconciliation. The king is leaving the door open. That door just closed. And what happened in the weeks leading up to that moment is one of the most revealing sequences this family has produced in years. Because it wasn't one thing, it was a series of things stacked on top of each other until Charles, a man who has absorbed more public punishment than almost any figure in modern royal history, apparently decided he had taken enough. Today, we are going through all of it. The Australia numbers, the shoppable tour wardrobe that made the palace ask a very uncomfortable question, the Ukraine speech, the state visit Harry was not part of, the financial picture that is more complicated than anyone outside the inner circle knew, and what sources close to the palace are now saying about where this all goes next. Let's start with what was actually happening behind the scenes before Australia, because the picture being painted by sources close to the palace is not the one being pushed through the Sussex-friendly press. The story that was being floated, the one that made it into several American outlets in early 2025, was that Harry desperately wanted to see his father, and a Sandringham invitation would be a warm gesture of family goodwill, a grandfather meeting his grandchildren, a son sitting down with his father. Simple, human, healing. That is not what was actually being proposed. According to sources close to Charles, the push for a Sandringham invitation was not primarily about family. It was about security funding. Legal costs have been mounting for years. Multiple lawsuits, security cases, and ongoing litigation that sources close to the couple's inner circle describe as staggering. And the personal fortune that was supposed to cover those costs, and the mortgages, and the staff, and the operational expenses of running an independent household in Montecito, that money is, by multiple accounts, under serious strain. When a member of the royal family receives a formal invitation from the king and travels to the United Kingdom, they automatically become eligible for state-funded security. That is the mechanism. That is what the invitation would have triggered. The palace understood this immediately, so the invitation was being framed as a family gesture, while the underlying calculation was financial. And then the asks escalated. Sources say Harry signaled that any visit would naturally depend on who else was going to be there, meaning William and Catherine. He was using his own brother's presence at a family gathering as a bargaining condition. And then came the children. Archie and Lilibet were reportedly referenced in these back-channel conversations as part of the case for why Charles should agree. The grandfather, who has met Lilibet once, briefly, and Archie perhaps twice. Sources close to Charles say the palace read that for exactly what it was. The phrase that was used, according to reporting, was emotional blackmail, and the response was direct. A statement went out making clear that Charles would welcome the chance to see his grandchildren, but the public briefings needed to stop. Every time Harry picks up the phone to call a journalist instead of calling his father, the palace knows what game is being played. And they had been watching that game for a long time. The Sandringham invitation was already being described inside palace circles as unwise, given everything that had happened with the Centibale situation. Harry's own charity, the one he co-founded in honor of Princess Diana, had filed a defamation lawsuit against him at the High Court in London. The charity's chairwoman, Dr. Sophie Shandalka, had accused Harry of orchestrating a media campaign against her. Harry categorically rejected the claims, but the optics of a prince being sued by the charity he built in his mother's memory were doing damage regardless of how that legal battle eventually played out. But Australia was still ahead, and Australia is what removed the last remaining doubt. Australia was supposed to be the reset. The trip was designed to remind the world that Harry and Meghan still mattered, that they could command attention, generate goodwill, draw crowds. They had done something similar in Nigeria, and the coverage had been broadly positive. Australia was meant to build on that. A Commonwealth country, a meaningful platform, a chance to recapture the narrative at a moment when the narrative had been slipping badly. The polling numbers that came back after the trip were, according to people close to the couple, described in one word: horrific. Not disappointing, not below expectations, horrific. Whatever they had hoped to achieve, the numbers moved in the wrong direction. The coverage that the trip was supposed to generate did not materialize in the form that mattered, and the goodwill that was supposed to follow a successful Commonwealth tour was not there. But it was not just the numbers. While the Australia trip was still generating its final round of press coverage, Meghan made every outfit she had worn on the tour immediately shoppable through a fashion platform called One-Off, an AI-powered site she had invested in. Dresses, bomber jackets, skirts, jewelry, shoes, all of it available to buy before the tour had even made headlines, broken down item by item with direct purchase links. The palace looked at that and asked one question. If this is what happens on a public tour, if every outfit becomes a commercial transaction before the plane has landed, what happens if she walks through the doors at Sandringham? What happens if she sits down for lunch with the king? Does that visit become shoppable content? Does the caption on the post read something like, "What to wear when meeting your dreaded stepmother"? That hypothetical, according to sources, was not treated as paranoid. It was treated as a projection based on an established pattern, and that pattern had played out every single time, in private conversations that became book chapters, in family moments that became Netflix scenes, in personal communications that ended up in front of cameras. One source close to Charles was direct about it. The Australia trip was the straw that broke the camel's back. Not a straw, the straw. And after that, the Sandringham invitation wasn't just unwise, it was off the table. But what Harry did next, the timing of it specifically, is what shifted the atmosphere inside the palace from disappointment to something considerably harder. King Charles was 4 days away from the most significant state visit of his reign. 2 days in Washington, a full day in New York, Virginia, then Bermuda, alone without Camilla. Every stop diplomatically waited, every appearance managed to the hour. And Charles was doing all of this while still managing cancer treatment, pausing that treatment specifically to make the trip. The physical toll of that itinerary on a healthy person would be significant. On a man dealing with what Charles is dealing with, it was an act of remarkable discipline. 4 days before all of that began, Harry flew to Ukraine. Not quietly, he gave a speech at the Kyiv Security Forum that directly criticized the sitting American government, with some reports claiming it was drafted with the help of AI, a detail Harry has not addressed publicly. The same government his father was about to engage with as a formal state guest. The same officials King Charles would be sitting across from in diplomatic meetings within the week. Think about what that sequencing actually means. Harry has given multiple interviews, emotional ones, filmed ones, interviews where his voice drops and he talks about how scared he is that his father will die before they reconcile. He has spoken publicly about how precious the remaining time is, how much family matters to him, how desperately he wants the relationship repaired. He has said all of it, on camera, more than once. And then, 4 days before his father's most important diplomatic moment, he inserted himself into one of the most sensitive international conversations of the year and said things that directly complicated the environment his father was walking into. Sources inside the palace have been making a specific observation for a while now, that the timing and the targeting of Harry's public moves are not random, that medical professionals have noted stress plays a meaningful role in how someone fighting a serious illness responds to treatment, and that William has been raising this point repeatedly inside the family. Every time William raises it, Harry delivers exactly the kind of move that validates the concern. The characterization being used is not careless. The word being used by people who have watched this pattern play out across years is precision. Now, alongside all of this, there was something else happening, something that tells you a great deal about where Harry's head actually was during the Washington state visit. According to reporting sourced to people directly inside his circle, Harry had been working for months, not weeks, months, to engineer a face-to-face meeting with his father during the American trip. Phone calls, back channels, lobbying through intermediaries. He reportedly wanted to be in the room for the state visit in some capacity. When that failed, the Sussex spokesperson went to Fox News with a statement saying there would be no meeting as this was a state visit and not a holiday. That statement gives everything away. You do not publicly explain why something is not happening unless the expectation that it might happen has already been established. No spokesperson statement was needed unless the request had been made and rejected. And the insider characterization of Harry's emotional state during those 4 days is specific. He was, according to a source close to the couple, consumed with jealousy, watching his father, who is ill, who paused cancer treatment for this trip, receive the attention of the American establishment, watching Charles address both houses of Congress, only the second British monarch ever to do so, after Elizabeth II in 1991, watching the state dinner at the White House, the 9/11 memorial, the bilateral relationship being tended to with the discipline and the weight that the role requires. And Harry could not be part of any of it. Not because he was excluded, because he left. He made those choices. California, the Oprah interview, the memoir, the Netflix documentary, the sealed retreat, the commercial operation. He made every one of those choices. And now he was watching his father, sick and pushing through an itinerary that would exhaust a healthy man, do the things Harry was born to do and chose not to. The grief of that, when you sit with it, is real. But the way that grief was being expressed, in phone calls to journalists, in a Ukraine speech timed to the week of his father's visit, in a spokesperson statement to American news, tells you something about where the relationship actually stands. While Harry was watching from Montecito, Charles was doing something that almost nobody saw coming. He recorded a broadcast, not a Christmas message, not a routine royal address, a personal, pre-recorded video filmed at Balmoral in the library, released on April 21, 2026, what would have been Queen Elizabeth's 100th birthday. On the surface, it was a centenary tribute to his mother, but the language Charles chose went considerably beyond commemoration. He acknowledged that the current moment would have troubled Queen Elizabeth deeply. He spoke about a brighter dawn being never far from the horizon, and then came the lines that people paying close attention heard as something more than tribute. He renewed what he called his solemn pledge of duty and service to all of them, his words. This came as a growing chorus of voices, royal commentators, some who consider themselves supporters of the monarchy, even a few in Charles's own circles, had begun asking out loud whether abdication should be considered, whether a king managing a serious illness, preparing for a grueling state visit while dealing with a son who was actively undermining him from 3,000 miles, could realistically meet the demands of the role. Charles did not say the word abdication once. He did not need to. He invoked his mother's belief that goodness prevails. He renewed the pledge, and he did it standing in the same castle where Queen Elizabeth spent her final weeks, the place where she died, still working, still in service until the very end. Those words were not chosen casually. Solemn pledge, duty, service. These are the words of someone who has examined what it means to step back from the role and has decided clearly, finally, that he will not. His mother reigned until her final days. He watched that, he absorbed it, and he has apparently decided that is the standard he intends to hold himself to, regardless of what his body is managing, and regardless of what his younger son keeps doing to make the job harder. There is something worth sitting with in that broadcast. Charles spent decades waiting to be king. He had the most observed apprenticeship in the history of the institution. He understood the weight of the role before he ever held it. And now, dealing with what is, by any measure, an extraordinarily difficult period, cancer treatment, diplomatic pressures, the ongoing Harry situation, an institution that needs active leadership, he is not looking for the exit. He is renewing the pledge. William has reportedly been making his own position very clear inside the palace. He is angrier than he has been in a long time. The Australia trip, and specifically Harry's comments in Australia about not wanting the role because the role killed his mother, comments made in a Commonwealth country where Charles is head of state, reportedly crossed a line for William that previous incidents had not crossed. Because every negative characterization of the royal family that Harry makes in a Commonwealth country is a characterization that William will eventually inherit responsibility for managing. He is watching Harry make deposits in an account that William will have to repay with institutional capital he has not yet received. Now let's talk about money, because the picture that has been presented to the public and the picture that sources who spent time actually digging through the financials are describing are not the same picture. The Netflix deal was announced and reported globally as worth $100 million, but insiders who spoke to Variety put the actual figure closer to $60 million over 5 years, and even that was never a guaranteed lump sum. It was structured around deliverables, development budgets, production benchmarks. In practice, you only see the full amount if you keep producing content that performs. The Harry and Meghan documentary performed. Everything after it, Heart of Invictus, Polo, and Meghan's lifestyle show With Love Meghan, did not replicate that opening. Netflix did not renew the deal when it expired in 2025. The Spotify contract, reported at $20 million, ended in 2023 after a single season of Meghan's Archetypes podcast, 12 episodes. Spotify's own head of podcast innovation called them on-air grifters. The full value of the deal was almost certainly never paid. What was supposed to replace the income from these partnerships was the next round of deals, the speaking fees, the brand. But the brand is the problem. Sources inside Hollywood, people who actually greenlight projects, not observers, have reportedly reached a quiet consensus that attaching Harry and Meghan's name to a project now works against it commercially. Not neutral, a net negative. The scripted Polo drama that was positioned as a flagship creative project is, according to industry sources, not expected to be released. And the outgoings are real regardless of the income picture. Security costs, multiple mortgages on the Montecito property, staff, legal fees from years of litigation in the UK, the inheritance Harry received from Princess Diana, which sources close to his finances have described as having been substantially drawn down to fund operational costs of independent life, was never going to stretch indefinitely without replacement income at the level that was originally projected. The phrase that sources closest to the couple are using, people inside their own orbit, not palace sources, not royal watchers, people who are actually around them, is not struggling, it is not going through a rough patch. The phrase being used is wildly unhappy. And beyond that, there are reports of goals that have quietly diverged between the two of them in ways that the people closest to the situation say may be impossible to bring back together. The media infrastructure that was supposed to protect them through all of this is also contracting. US Weekly, the publication that spent years functioning as something close to a promotional operation for Harry and Meghan, running cover stories and carefully placed exclusives designed to shape American public perception in their favor, is gone. Not restructuring, not pivoting, gone. Half its staff cut overnight, the office closed. The former editor who presided over that era of Sussex-friendly coverage has since gone independent, and what he is saying independently is strikingly different from what he was publishing when he had a masthead behind him. The media allies who remain, People magazine, Town and Country, Vanity Fair, a handful of Instagram accounts with suspiciously on-brand content, represent what is left of what was once a broad operation capable of shaping narratives across multiple platforms. A few magazines and some social media pages. That is what remains. And the reporters who had been documenting the gap between the curated image and the documented reality for years, the ones who were dismissed, denied, buried under waves of access journalism pushing the opposite story, are watching all of this with, as one put it, a very specific kind of recognition. There is a video clip, short, quiet, easy to miss, but former employees, people who worked inside Harry and Meghan's operation and have since left, say it stopped them cold. The clip shows Meghan in public, smiling. On the other side of her face, she's looking at her chief of staff, Sarah Fosmo, with an expression that former employees say they recognized immediately. Not because the expression itself was particularly dramatic, because they knew what came next, because they had been on the receiving end of exactly what that look meant. The word former staff members used to describe the environment inside the household was not difficult, it was not demanding, it was something considerably darker. One description has been widely repeated among people who have spoken to former employees. You are treated like a tradesman who is there to fix the toilet, not a person, not a professional, a utility, someone to be used and then disposed of the moment you stop being convenient. The staff turnover inside the household has been significant and repeated. People who came in believing in the mission, believing in the brand, believing in the couple, and left carrying something that more than one former employee has described quietly as deeply damaging, the kind that resurfaces years later from a 3-second video clip. What makes this particularly notable is that Harry has built a significant part of his public identity around anti-bullying. He has spoken about it in interviews, championed it in campaigns, used it as a cornerstone of the image he and Meghan have worked to construct. And the people who have worked closest to them, who have seen what happens when the cameras are off and the doors are closed, use a very different language to describe the environment they were working in. The clock, according to people close to the situation, is already ticking on how long the current chief of staff stays. It has ticked before with many people who walked in and eventually walked out. And each time someone leaves, they take another piece of the operation with them, another contact, another relationship, another fragment of whatever credibility remains. William is delivering an ultimatum. That is the specific language being used by sources inside the palace, and it is not language that gets used casually in the context of an institution that has spent decades managing conflict through restraint and careful public positioning. The ultimatum is essentially this: if Charles accommodates Harry in any form, if there is any version of a half-in, half-out arrangement that gives Harry institutional adjacency without institutional accountability, William believes it will be the beginning of the end for the royal family as a functioning institution. His reasoning is specific. Every concession establishes a precedent. Every precedent is harder to reverse than the one before it. The Sandringham agreement that was negotiated in January 2020, the one that set clear terms for Harry and Meghan's departure, is being actively repudiated by Harry's ongoing behavior, and William's position is that repudiation cannot be rewarded with accommodation. There are reportedly senior aides inside the palace who disagree with William on this. Their argument has a practical logic. Harry is going to conduct royal-style tours regardless of what anyone says. He has demonstrated this across Jordan, Ukraine, Australia, and the planned Africa trip. If the tours are happening anyway, the accommodation argument goes, better to have some institutional oversight than none. William's counterargument is that if Charles folds, Harry is simply going to have more rope to do more damage with, and the person left cleaning up the mess will be William, inheriting an institution whose ability to control its own representation has been permanently compromised. Charles, for his part, has been firmer than expected. He resisted the engineered meeting during the state visit. He held the position on Sandringham. He renewed the pledge of duty and service in that Balmoral broadcast. Whether that firmness holds through the summer, when Harry is reportedly planning to return to Britain for Invictus preparations, is the question that nobody inside the palace and nobody outside it can answer with confidence yet. The pattern over the years has been periods of firmness followed by periods of softening when the paternal instinct reasserts itself. William knows the pattern, which is why he is making his position known through every available channel at every available moment, so that when Charles is tempted to extend the hand again, he knows exactly what William thinks of that decision. The state visit is over now. The congressional address is in the permanent record. The time capsule that Charles contributed to during the visit, connected to America's 250th anniversary and sealed until 2276, is sealed. It is an acknowledgement, as one observer put it, that what the monarchy represents outlasts the current actors, that the relationship between Britain and America will still matter in 2276 in ways that neither Charles nor anyone around him will be alive to observe. Charles signed the capsule, he boarded the plane, he paused cancer treatment, he pushed through an itinerary that would challenge a healthy man. He did the work. And somewhere across the Atlantic, the two people who have caused a significant portion of the difficulty he is managing were watching, calculating, deciding what move comes next. The door at Sandringham is closed. The invitation is gone. The media allies are contracting. The financial picture is worse than was publicly known. The staff keep leaving. The projects are stalling in Hollywood. And the two people at the center of it all are, by the account of sources inside their own circle, deeply and privately unhappy. Meanwhile, Charles is still showing up, still doing the work, still representing an institution that, despite everything, is holding together considerably better than the people working hardest to damage it. The question I keep coming back to, and I want to hear what you think in the comments, is this. At what point does Charles stop absorbing the hits and actually take the kind of decisive action that William has been pushing for? Because the restraint has been remarkable, but restraint has a limit, and based on everything we have seen over the last several months, that limit may be approaching faster than anyone expected. If you are not subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit the bell, turn on notifications, because this story is not finished, not even close, and you do not want to be the last one to find out what happens next.